Many people have heard about the legend of Eddie Aikau and his ill-fated voyage on the Hokulea, but there were premonitions of trouble long before that, and real conflicts among those who were first involved with the Hokulea project. James Kimo Hugho was one of them. 40 years later, he's published a book that tells his version of the events. Here's his story.
I was born here in Honolulu. We lived in Kaimuki. My father was always in the ocean down in Waikiki. He had a canoe, which he used for laying net, picking opihi, limu, everything from the ocean. I got acclimated to and familiar to the Hawaiian outrigger canoe, which is called the Va'akaukahi, single outrigger, and paddled for 5 different canoe clubs here. I went to Kamehameha schools. My bloodline is Hawaiian-Austrian. My mother is pure Hawaiian, and my father was a shipbuilder for the Navy, and he was involved in building and repairing PT boats, in addition to the other types of vessels. So he was very heavily involved in the maritime activities. So once we got to the Hokulea project, we had a lot of shipbuilders come in, but one thing that we noticed was we had a lot of volunteers. So you appreciate volunteers, but would there be a consistency on application of shipbuilding? You know, and I was concerned about that. Well, the Hokulea project got underway on paper as far as a nonprofit organization began in 1973. And I was invited by Herb Connie, who was one of the 3 who began this project. The original intent was to have the canoe built out of koa, and they would be using 40,000 yards of coconut senet and braided lauhala sails. So all of this, you know, put this project into the more authentic realm. But there was, you know, questions about how did the Polynesians find Hawaii and go back. And there were naysayers like Andrew Sharp who felt that the people who settled here first happened to drift and wasn't intentional voyages. They put 1973 as the year of the canoe to have it built, 1974 the year of the men as far as the training of the crew members, and 1976 the year of the voyage. Herb Connie asked me to take in Hokulea on her shakedown cruises throughout the state. We began talking about my activities with the 5 different canoe clubs, learning about the rigging. He wanted to find out more about the rigging of the yakus, that's the cross pieces, the ama, to the main hull. We had learned while we were in the canoe clubs, and I shared this with Herb, is that if the lashings were not pa'a or tight, and the seas would be pretty active, then the hull and the yaku would start working, and eventually there's a possibility that they can separate. After we were finishing our inter-island sails, we had Kauai was the last island to go to before we come back and get her ready for Tahiti. 3 months prior to that, a Hawaiian crewmate from Kalapana had a premonition and dream that the right hull, the Akea hull, would be completely submerged. Everybody would be okay, the water would be malie, flat, and that we would be saved by a steel-hulled foreign vessel. So that's explicit. So 3 or 4 months come into play, and we're getting ready to leave Kauai, and things are not looking good. The second in command, I watched him working on the radio and making his tests, and he wasn't receiving anything coming on. So that became to be the first indication to me that, you know, things are falling apart. In the meantime, as I was sailing Hokulea, I could notice the framework, the interior framework starting to come loose, and the rigging starting to come loose. The premonition, the dreams, came to fruition on October 3rd. 1975. Things weren't looking good. Our course of coming back to Oahu and the currents and the winds were not taking us east. We started then heading towards Japan, and so, you know, the mood on board wasn't really pleasant. All of a sudden, it gave way and we took on water for some strange reason, and the right hull, the Akea hull, started to be submerged. We were at a great distance from Kauai, really far away. And maybe after about 3 hours, we saw on the horizon this rooster tail, a big stream of water. So Sea Flight, because of the good conditions, was making their run to Lehui, and they saw us and they came and they picked us up. There was a board of inquiry. They laid blame to the captain, and I didn't know that they laid blame to us too. And as we started getting to rebuild the canoe, I was seeing that the promises of having a cultural input, especially the spiritual input, was not going to happen. So when I began seeing these layers of the Hawaiian nest being torn away, I wasn't happy anymore, and I figured, well, you know, this is a big joke now, and I think it's a disservice to the culture, and I had no interest in sailing anymore. And I never got involved for, about 30 years. So it was a learning process for me to really step up there when I went back with the fire department, because now we were doing a lot of helicopter rescues, and then I would be hearing about Hokulea, you know, voyaging, and then we hear about the loss of life of Eria Kau. So Hokulea was all over, and it was hard for me to separate, you know, my past with Hokulea. So I just stayed on the side, and I gave advice to people who came to ask me for advice, and I maintained my strict kuleana with life safety in the rescue squad. And I had other jobs at the same time to sort of break up this depression. I started doing commercials for United Airlines, Kodak, all of these big companies. Then I got picked to do what they call heavies in the original 5-0, like Hitman. I was always interested in cinematography and someday doing my own production. What you see in the book will show you what I started documenting in 1973 all the way, you know, to 2013. I listened to this show in the morning. It was Mike Buck, and in between Mike's dialogue, there would be a voice that would be very mellow and calm, and so I'd always be attached to this tone, this person's voice, to begin my day. Mike would say, "Oh, we have Malin Moore here doing the traffic and the weather," and so I happened to decide, well, I know nothing about websites. And I just happened to come upon his website, and I scrolled through, and I liked everything I saw on it. And I sent an email to Malin. I explained who I was. We met down at Kahala Mall. I brought my laptop. I let him run through the whole draft, all the photographs, and you know, I told him, I says, "Malin, I want you to do this for me. I don't care how much, but I just aloha you." And then he picked it up and he ran with it, and we had the first release of the book at Kahala Mall, and I had my cousin Palani Vaughn put on a show. So that was our first book signing. Malin added to that, and then more brick and mortar stores, which I prefer, came online, like Na Mea Hawaii, basically books up in Hilo, now the Bishop Museum, and now I'm getting feelers from New Zealand. And we've been quite active. I've been getting a lot of feedback of people who like the website, and I mentioned to them that we're going to look at the website as not only selling the book, we're going to have continuing education about voyaging. So that's what we're working on now, but I couldn't have been more pleased by having this website done by Malin.